Okay. We'll wait till 4:01 my time right on the dot. There we go. All right. Well, welcome everybody. Thank you so much for coming to our STARS HE webinar on the IDA accreditation. So I'm going to introduce our guest speaker. So Bethany Moffitt is a former intermediate teacher with 9 years of certificated experience. She is currently an associate program director and professor at City University of Seattle, where she has revised all literacy courses to reflect the IDA knowledge and practice standards. As a consequence of that work, 3 of CityU's literacy programs have been conferred IDA accreditation. Her goal as a member of the higher education community, the vice president of the Reading League Washington, the program design and development advisor for the Reading Equity Project of Washington, and a doctoral candidate in the Mount St. Joseph Reading Science doctoral program, is to ensure that all pre-service and in-service teachers are fully prepared to teach every student using effective research-based literacy instruction. So I'm very excited to transition over to Bethany, and she is going to share her work at her university.
Thank you so much for that introduction. And I just want to make sure, can everyone see my screen okay? Excellent. So we have a nice small group. So for this presentation, I would be very happy and comfortable if you have a question to put it in the chat, or if you're okay with coming off camera, you can also use the raise hand feature. So I can pause whenever there's an opportunity and answer any questions you might have, especially things that are more specific to the accreditation process. But I would be happy to discuss. So I am very excited to share the IDA accreditation journey of City University of Seattle. And so just a quick overview of our program to kind of contextualize like how big or small we are comparatively. We are in Seattle, Washington. We have 3 IDA accredited reading endorsement pathways. So we have a BA Ed, and that program is not accredited, but the master's in teaching. So there's MED, MIT, and then we have a reading endorsement program. So those 3 programs are all IDA accredited. Our NCTQ Reading Foundations grade is A+ for undergrad and A for our grad program. We have 8 full-time faculty members in the School of Education and Leadership, and we have approximately 12 adjunct professors at any one time. And as I'll discuss later, only about 4 of them are qualified to teach the literacy courses. And then year to year, we have approximately 200 students in our teacher prep program. So the agenda for today is to talk about pre-accreditation. What does CityU look like before? The actual journey itself, what are the requirements and what resources can you use? And then additional resources for transition and accountability, and then just an opportunity to ask any questions you might have. So pre-accreditation. So here's a map of the United States. I got this from the Reading League Compass. And the question that I asked, or the parameter I put in, was about educator preparation programs, and if there are any approval criteria, any guidelines for teacher prep programs specifically. So as you can see on this map, I'm in Washington State, and currently, if you see that there is any state that is white, there are no current criteria or supports or guidelines. And so here I am in Washington, and the only accredited program in Washington State. So just take a second to look at the map and see if you can find your state and if your state has any guidelines or criteria or not. I see Megan is saying that your state is white. Katie is also saying a state with no guidelines. Yeah. Colorado was blue. Okay, that's great, Karen. I'm happy to see that. But I am also really happy to see that there is blue on this map, because there was a point in time where I felt like I was by myself. I was alone. And this was when I first started my journey, which I'll discuss. but it's very nice to see that there are a lot of states that are making movements. So if you're interested in the Reading League Compass, there are other parameters you can put in, like a legislature, if there's guidelines for assessments. So if you haven't already had a chance, I think maybe this group might be familiar, but it's really helpful to see what's going on in your state in particular. So this is the part I think is always, I wouldn't say it's most difficult to talk about, but I think it's more emotional to talk about because it is the turning point and the why. Why City University? Why Washington? Why me? Decided to make this change. So I was an adjunct professor. I was still teaching fourth and fifth grade at the time. I started in fourth, and then I transitioned into a fifth grade role. And I was teaching all my courses at City University as an adjunct, and at the time didn't realize, but they were aligned to balanced literacy and whole language. And so I had a particular course that I was teaching an assignment I was really comfortable with because it's something I did in my own classroom. I showed them how to do a running record. We showed them the three cues of the three cueing system, and we would practice on a student and note the different miscues, note how many mistakes, note their fluency. And I thought, wow, I'm doing a really great job. I always felt great because it's exactly what I did in my school. My whole district was doing running records and using the Fountas and Bunnell benchmark assessment system. And so I was feeling like I was preparing our pre-cert candidates or pre-certificated candidates had to just step into the classroom and assess their students. And so I think it was the second year I was teaching this course. And a teacher candidate, after we finished, everyone's feeling great, everyone's running record looks about the same, and we understand what was different. And they asked me, okay, how do I use this to help my students? And let's say she was level S. She had a student that was level S, which is what happens when you use a level system. And I honestly didn't know how to answer her question because I had used the F&P and I'd leveled my students for years, literal years. And I couldn't really tell her. I had an F&P like manual that's about that thick, and maybe level S has like 6, 8 pages that talks about all the skills that an S level reader to be able to do. And I couldn't say, well, just pull out your manual and pick a couple skills to focus on. I had no answer. And so that was the moment that I realized that I was teaching something that never worked for my students. Year after year, I would see that I would let my fifth graders, move on to the next grade, go into middle school, not being able to read. And so my teacher candidate just basically threw me for a loop. And that was the moment I realized that I was not teaching my candidates to be ready to support their own students because I wasn't ready. I couldn't support my students. So why in the world would I teach them to do the same thing? Why was I perpetuating something that failed my own students year after year? And so that was my turning point is a teacher candidate just asking a simple question. And so that's where I got to my starting point. Uh, After that course, I actually talked to the program director for that course and I said, basically explain the situation and let her know. And she said, you can go through the curriculum development process. If you feel like this isn't working, go ahead and fix the courses. I was like, whoa, wow, I'm just an adjunct. You're going to let me do that? She's like, yeah, if it's not working, fix it. The program and the process was pretty long. The curriculum development process at City U, it takes a minute, so you have to join a pipeline. But she gave me the okay and the go ahead, and I was really excited. So that's where my starting point is. All literacy courses were aligned to balance literacy. And the hard thing is because at the time, all the coursework, all the assignments applied to the classrooms in Washington. Just like I said, everyone's doing running records. But the problem was that it was not aligned to the research on how students learned how to read. And that is our responsibility. And so that is basically where my start was, is I felt like I had a responsibility to make sure that all the courses are supporting pre-cert teachers. Because I was just perpetuating misguided, outdated, incorrect research. And so I highlighted responsibility. I had an opportunity to go to the Reading League conference this past week in North Carolina. I'm not sure if anyone else was there. But during the leadership retreat with Dr. Maria Murray, she asked a question, and I think it set the tone, and it is really why I put responsibility in bold. She asked, I want you to think of one name of one student that you let down, and everyone in the room is silent. And of course, I can probably name an entire classroom full of students that I let down year after year because I was teaching something that did not teach them how to read. Dr. Murray kind of ended on a lighter note. She said, okay, now think about a student that you helped. And as I was thinking of students, I wasn't actually thinking about kids because I had left the classroom before I was able to change. But I was able to think about the teacher candidates that I've been able to impact and the students that they then can impact. And so that's why I thought it's my responsibility for all the students that I let down, all the teachers I want to support. And that's why I knew I had to revise the literacy courses. So the only thing is that I didn't know where to start. Like I had a starting point. This needs to change. But from there, I wasn't sure where to go because I'm in Washington. You saw my state is completely white. There were no guidelines. And so the time I had just got a puppy, so I was walking a lot. And so I actually looked up a podcast and I was just kind of looking through and accidentally stumbled upon the Science of Reading podcast by Amplify. And it was very luck. I don't know if it's luck, happenstance, fate. And one of the first podcasts I listened to was Emily Hanford's Why Can't Students Read? I can't remember the exact title. I apologize. But that basically was telling the story of my teaching career and all the students that I taught. And so my starting point, thanks to that, was the science of reading. And for the first time in my teaching career and even in higher education, I had the opportunity to think about the science of how students learn how to read. So after I realized that I have the starting point, the science of reading, my next question was accountability. Who holds higher education accountable in Washington? And I was able to find out no one really. We're part of an organization called WACD, and we are aligned to some reading standards from 2013. They are not aligned to the science of reading. So I realized that Washington State did not have options for me. So instead, I looked for guidance. And back then, and it doesn't feel like it was too long ago, and I have a timeline with actual years, but at the time, based on my knowledge, these are the things that provided guidance. The International Dyslexia Association, they had an accreditation pipeline, and their knowledge and practice standards were exactly what I was looking for. The NCTQ, or the National Council on Teacher Quality, and then Dr. Stalner. I multiple times during my accreditation journey, I didn't really have a lot of places to reach out, and I would email Dr. Staller, and she's like, "Oh yeah, here's 4 syllabi. Here's a reading list. Here's this. Here's that," and she just threw stuff my way. She was so generous, so open, and you'll see on my now what's available. Now she has the stores in higher education. She had it back then, and I just might have missed it. I think she said, "Why don't you come join?" Um, so as you can see, accountability in Washington hasn't changed based on that United States slide, but the guidance is so much more robust. And that's why I think anyone that's thinking about starting this journey now is the time. Now is the hour for you to make this difference because there's so much support out there. So you see the NCTQ is still available, I feel like they really do hold teacher prep programs accountable with the grading system. You still have Dr. Staller and everybody inside this alliance. The Center for Reading Science has so many wonderful resources. The Reading Lean Compass, and then the Reading Lean has an educator preparation program, Community of Practice. So a lot of resources, a lot of support in order to move your program forward into IDA accreditation, essentially. And so for me, and for what worked for what I was able to do in my program, I chose to go the accreditation route. And that's why we're here today. And so I'll share now the accreditation journey. These are the programs that I developed. I will start out by just saying that the first one, the Reading Endorsement Program, is for insert teachers or teachers that are currently practicing in the classroom. Really like this one because I feel like it's a second chance for the teachers that I may have taught incorrectly, or teachers that are currently in their classrooms. Their teacher prep program didn't already prepare them for this. So I really like number one because I feel like it's my second chance to give back. And then the second and third are both master's programs. One is a master's in teaching and one is a master's in education. One I want to specifically note at the bottom is I had these programs to develop, but I also had to revise the gen ed classes. We hear a lot about sometimes there's constraints for students that are going through an education program, like there aren't enough courses, there aren't enough hours. And it's true, it really is a true constraint on program plans. But I had to make sure that even if our students weren't taking the reading specialization paths, they still had the science of reading. So the 3 general education courses and the VA Ed program, and then 3 MIT Gen Ed courses, and then 2 alt route courses were all also revised. So every literacy course in our entire university is aligned to the science of reading. And so this is the actual process. And I took this from the IDA site. So no, I have no creative control of this, and I did not make this myself. But it's just basically the process for if you are considering starting the accreditation journey. So the first step is to contact the IDA, fill out the application, the letter of intent, and then decide whether you want to do the pipeline or the fast track. And that's one key consideration. City University of Seattle, we chose to do the accreditation pipeline with the KPIRI. And so that process takes about 6 to 7 months. And then the pipeline or the fast track, that could take about 3 months. So that's one consideration. And then I was unable to do the plus, which means with the practicum, because at the time, considering application in Washington State classrooms was already kind of iffy. But I'm hoping within the next year, I'm going to reapply for accreditation plus specifically for the practicum. There's a lot of resources out there now that I'm really excited that we'll talk a little bit more about. So this slide has a lot on it. I don't think Dr. Anita Arsher would like it, but it is a timeline that kind of shows basically from start to finish about how long it took. And if you give me 1 second, I'm going to close my door. So sorry, the wind blew my door open. Okay, so like I said, the fast track is a 3-month option. And essentially, the IDA accreditation process recommends that you could do the fast track if you feel very confident that you have met all of the knowledge and practice standards. And so this is actually, I feel like a much more doable option, especially for a lot of the teacher prep programs that are going through like as a cohort or a consortium, they're working together. I think the fast track option is definitely possible. The pipeline was really helpful for me because, like I said, I felt like it was kind of an island in a sea of Washington. And so I guess in the timeline, so January 2021 was when my candidate said, like, how's this going to help me in the classroom? And so from there, my science of reading journey began. And I'll talk about how I developed myself. But I went through that process and I was already looking into IDA accreditation. And so I was able to, in November of 2021, get our application approved. And so the pipeline, like I said, I chose that option, launched in April. And essentially, across from April to October, every month was dedicated to a different part of the accreditation application. So my final submission. So for example, in May would be part 1. And so there'd be a webinar. Now within the webinar, you get exemplars, you get examples, you get ideas for textbooks and resources. And most importantly, and what was really helpful is you have access to the accreditation people that are going to be reviewing your applications. You can ask any question you can think of. So I feel like the pipeline was very supportive for that reason. I never had any questions, and if I did, I could simply ask them. And then one more thing to note, you'll see that we have the different parts are spread out across the 6 months. And then you also see, like in June, for example, that there was a small group discussion and work time. And that just felt like an opportunity for everyone that was in the pipeline. We all came together, we shared resources. It felt, I think the intention was to kind of build community. I think people were a little more closed and careful, not like some other consortiums or program that like I can't think of the word, EPP, Educator Prep Program Community of Practice. So that was why that was a mouthful. That feels like a true community. And I think that that's what the webinars were, the small group discussions were meant for. And I think that nowadays, I think people will be much more open. But it was another great opportunity to support what I was doing. And then the final thing that was really great about the pipeline is that after part one in May, I had 4 to 6 weeks to submit a draft. And so I had all my questions answered. I had some exemplars to look at. And so I had 4 to 6 weeks to develop and then send a draft in, and I would receive feedback about the same time that the next webinar started. So overall, based on this timeline, just key points, support for each part, a community to discuss and ask questions, and then draft feedback is why the pipeline was so useful. And last thing to note is I submitted the final application in October of 2022, and then accreditation was officially conferred in July 2023, which was very exciting. And so this is what all the parts mean. And I know this is a lot to see. And if there's any questions, like I said, feel free to put it in the chat. But part one is basically your program profile, where I'll talk all about City U, talk about our different programs and what I plan to put through the pipeline. Part two is a very, very long way to say basically what is the course content. So in my reading endorsement program, there are 4 courses. What's going to be in those 4 courses? Part 3 was the practicum. As I said, we are not accredited plus yet. So I did not have to do part 3. Part 4 was faculty credentials. And then part 5 was impact metrics. And so a couple of things to note about this. So faculty credentials, I wanted to highlight this in particular because where Washington was, where our faculty were, these were the requirements in order to be qualified to teach our literacy courses. And I said at the top of this presentation that we had about 4, and I'm one of them. So this is what was required. You had to have a faculty resume, a statement of professional expertise, which was a narrative, a summary of instructor and practicum supervisor credentials, and then all instructors or faculty had to pass the CAPERI, which is the Knowledge and Practice Examination for Effective Reading Instruction from CIRI. And so one thing to note about that, number 4, is it has to happen approximately 1 year from program accreditation or sooner. We were given accreditation on July 2023, and we launched in October with our fall quarter. So our hope was between July and October, we tried to get everyone to take the CAPERI. And so let's talk about, like, what does that even look like? Like, this journey feels like it was just about a year from me figuring out I wanted to do this to actually doing it. And the thing is that in order for instructors and faculty and professors to be able to teach this, they have to be experts in a lot of things. And I was trying to make this brief, but I could probably list many, many more things. I could probably put the KPS up here. But essentially, the faculty that are teaching these courses, they have to understand the linguistic features and language constructs of English for word recognition and language comprehension. So the simple view of reading, and also considering multilingual learners and language variation. Those are also things to consider. So not just English, but how does it apply to other languages? The basics of the psychology of reading and reading development, best practices in pedagogy for explicit instruction and structured literacy, and the use of valid and reliable assessments to inform teaching and instruction. And that was the best I could possibly summarize. And I used Teaching Reading is Rocket Science from 2020, which is, maybe people are familiar with that. But Dr. Moats really summarizes what's necessary in higher education. And so that is the question. How do faculty acquire this necessary knowledge? Because it's a lot. And it was a very short amount of time to launch. And so for me, my journey was pretty much personal. I don't know if vendetta is the right word, but I was on a personal journey. And so I took the time, I took the resources, I found what I could. And back in 2021, there was a lot of webinars. We're still thinking like kind of COVID times. So there were so many webinars, and I signed up for every single one. And I wrote notes as if it was the first time I was hearing why is phonics important? So I just wanted to keep building my mental Velcro. And it was just building and building each time. I did Reading 101. I asked my university to put me into letters. And so we paid when you could still be a single person going through the letters training. Washington State had a focus on the dyslexia modules, and we went through Glean Education, and I did a structured literacy practicum. And then I read a ton on my own as I was actually developing courses. Um, and so these are the ways that faculty can try to develop themselves. And so the other three faculty, they happened to be in places that had letters. And they were also going through Glean, and we were going to webinars together, reading books together. I would say I was the catalyst and kind of the leader through the process, and we were supporting each other, but we had to make sure that we had all of our knowledge to the best of our ability. Um, and so another thing that I can say is very lucky for me that I also got into Mount St. Joseph. I got into the Reading Science doctoral program. And that is something that has been huge in developing my knowledge and understanding of being able to teach teacher prep, to develop teacher prep in order to make sure all of our teacher candidates are ready for the classroom. And so the reason I put number 4, part 4 first, the faculty credentials, is because in order to do all of the course content, we had to have the knowledge to do it. And I'm still learning every day. Going to the Reading Conference was amazing. I was learning even there because the IDA accreditation requires all of these things. So for every course, and so I had to do 7 for the IDA accreditation process. Um, and so you have to have a syllabus for all of them. You have to have major assignments, including the rubric and any supporting documents. You have to have a syllabus summary, which I'll show in the next slide with these things. And then overall, for each program, you also have to have a knowledge and practice coverage rubric. And I think I said 7. Actually, I meant 9. So there are 5 courses in the master's, and then there are 4 courses in the reading endorsement program. My apologies. 5 plus 4 is 9. I love reading, maybe not so much math. Okay, so this is an example of the syllabus summary. So on the previous page, or sorry, slide, I discussed that you need the syllabus summary, and this is what it looks like. And I took this from my own program, so I'm hoping that there is no issue, but this is what I worked on. But as you can see along the top, you have to have KPS alignment, talk about the objective and the topic, the accountable reading, the assignments and activities, and the check for understanding for each module. City University has a 10-week schedule. So every one of the courses had to have 10 modules or 10 weeks of content. One thing to note that for accreditation, you also have to share and create every activity, every quiz, every rubric. So anywhere you see that there's blue is a hyperlink that was attached to like the module 3 quiz or activity 1 or the rubrics. And so it is actually pretty easy to organize. IDA accreditation requires that you use Google Docs. And so I just had folders for each course, each program, and I had everything neatly kind of organized by module. So that part wasn't difficult. I think what took the longest after doing the syllabi summary, so 10 weeks, is then developing each activity to ensure that these are all connected and they all align. Do they meet the knowledge and practice standards? Do they meet the module objective? Does the module objective connect to the course objective? And then does the course objective fit into the overall program? So that's why it was really nice to have like the 6 months to develop, to have the support, to have the draft feedback, and just have the support of other people that were either a lot farther than me in the science of reading journey, like Dr. Stoller, or people that were kind of in the trenches with me as we were working on this together. And so some development resources. Like I said, there was a then and now. Back then, the development resources I basically had were the KPS. So I made myself a spreadsheet. I had 5 different colored highlighters, and I would go through and ensure that I had every single knowledge and practice standard, not just covered once, but twice, 3 times, just to make sure the coverage was comprehensive. Can't just mention it once and kind of move on. That's why if you go back, the KPS coverage rubric at the bottom is a place to show a cross program. So I had one for each course, and then I had one large KPS coverage rubric. There were a lot of papers on my desk for a lot of months. And so now the Center for Reading Science has resources that I've utilized since accreditation. The CAT 3.0, which I'll talk a little bit more about, the textbook spreadsheet, and the Reading League Compass also has resources as well. But I have personally utilized the Center for Reading Science in particular. And I wish I had had them then. And that's why I think that this work for other like teacher prep programs will be a lot easier because there are so many resources out there. And so this is for the Center of Reading Science. The attribution or the link is at the bottom. But these, if I would have seen this when I first started my journey, I would have just been over the moon. This would have been the most amazing place to find resources because this is exactly what I needed. I was really learning and developing in real time and refining as I learned more. And even since accreditation in July 2023, I have gone through and actually used course alignment and planning tool, the CAP 3.0, to make sure that like I'm solid in everything and do I need to revise anything? So definitely, if you haven't already, if you're not familiar with this resource, I highly recommend it. There is model syllabi, resources, the textbook spreadsheet, and then the course alignment and planning tool. And then the syllabi examples were fantastic. So for my reading endorsement that had 4 courses, the 4 course sequence would be a really helpful exemplar and kind of a guidepost because all these syllabi or follow the KPS and also are aligned to the CAPT standards. And so I'll say a little bit about this. You'll see at the bottom, this was authored by Dr. Staller, Dr. Corbo, Dr. Murdoch, Dr. Betts. All these people have done this amazing work. I want to make sure I say everybody's name. We said we have Lisa, we have Tracy, we have Amanda, we have Jamie. All these people have made this amazing work on the course alignment and planning tool of the CAPT 3.0. And I have used this since. But what is really nice about this is take a look at the website. It talks about how to use it, what it's for, and you see that it has the knowledge and practice standards, but the objectives are also very, very well written. And so you can see that your courses can be aligned to the objectives, not only on the CAPT, but also on the IDA KPS, so the knowledge and practice standards. And so you see that that's the RELF and the 1, 2, 3. And so I wish I would have had this when I was doing all of my highlighting but it basically the RELF each stands for like a reading, if it's an evaluation or an activity, if it's a lecture, or if it's field work. So basically you can say like, oh yeah, I did a lecture and I did a reading and I did field work. This is pretty well covered. And then the 1, 2, 3 talks about like, is it introduced? Is it covered deeply or is it reviewed? So this tool in particular really took my KPS like documents like to the next level and really helped. And you can also see across your 4 courses to make sure that if you only have introduced something in course 1 and you never see it again, you might want to think about how can you circle back and interleave more practices for learning and application. So this was also really helpful. So I would say the CAPT is not the same as the KPS overall alignment, but it's relatively similar. It serves the same function. Like, where do you see alignment across all your courses? So highly recommend this tool. And like I said, it is available here on the Center for Reading Science website. And I believe it's the course alignment planning tool. It's over in the upper right. And then you also have a syllabus review tool. And so just some additional resources, both for transitioning into this work and accountability in some ways. Because I keep using the word accountability because Washington State, we still don't have anything that's holding us accountable. We don't have legislation. There isn't, the hope is we're working on it as a league. But the accountability truly lies within us. Like we know whether or not you want to make sure all kids can read. That is the goal. That's the hope. That's the responsibility. So I always feel like I don't have accountability in Washington, but I have an accountability to my students, my old students, all new students. So that's why I use accountability. But resources for transition. I see Megan said, if you only did one, would you use the CAPT or the KPS? That is a great question. If I were to use just one, I would use the CAPT. I think, because the way that this, I'll go back to that. The way the objectives are worded, you can see that they target more than one KPS. And so I can consider like, what am I really doing? I feel like the objectives are really well written. And you could see all the people that authored and worked on this are absolute experts in the field. So they have looked at the KPS much, much more than me. So I would start with the CAPT. And then I think it would actually be a pretty easy transition to the required paperwork for the IDA, because you still have the KPS coverage rubric, but it would be easy to just put everything into that one. So I'd start CAPT, do the KPS, because the KPS are in the CAPT. Thank you for asking. Okay, so just some resources. I've talked a lot about some of these, but additional, and if Megan's okay with sharing, I'm okay with sharing my slide deck, so you can click on these resources. The Center for Reading Science, which I talked a great deal about. And then here we are for the Stronger Together Alliance for Reading Science and Higher Education. So the STAR is HE. The Reading Leagues has a community of practice. So if you are interested in this work and connecting with people across the United States, this link will get you to an interest form. And I believe they meet once a month or once every other month. And it's on like a Friday. So that's great. And then the Reading League Compass, there's specifically a link for the educator preparation programs. A lot of good resources. Some are pretty similar to what's available for the Center of Reading Science, some additional, but they do link to the Center for Reading Science and say, hey, this is a good resource. And the Reading League is great. And then I work with Michelle Elia, and she has worked on with a lot of other people, but she always recommends the all Ohio literacy modules. So I wanted to give a shout out for that because that's also a great resource. And I know there are more out there. So if anyone here in this webinar has any that I didn't mention or list, I think I would love it if you could put it in the chat, because the more resources that we all have to develop these programs, I think the better, because that makes our teacher candidates stronger and it makes our students stronger. So any other resources you know of, please add to the chat. And then reference here, I referenced the CAPT and then the Teaching Reading is Rocket Science 2020. And so this is an opportunity just for any last questions. I'm going to just put this is how you can reach out to me. I've had a couple universities reach out with questions. They're in the pipeline and like, oh, it's really hard to get to standard 8. What did you do for that particular standard? So I'm very much okay with answering questions, or even if you're wondering if you want to start this process, is it worth it? Is the time worth it? Can I do this? I'll say, yes, you can do this. But I would be happy. I just put my email in the chat. Feel free to reach out by email. We can set up a Zoom meeting, we can set up a phone call. But I'm definitely here as a support. But I will leave it back to if you have any questions that weren't already asked.
Hi, Bethany. I have a question. So you had the 3 different programs, right? That went through this process. So were all of you like at the same level of understanding and coursework and everything's aligned when you began when you began the IDA accreditation process? Or did it come, I mean, did it need to be ready, is what I'm saying, before you started?
Did I need to be ready before I started?
Oh, the three levels of coursework, the master's program, and is yours an undergrad? Yours? Okay.
I would say the reading endorsement would be considered undergrad. And
Okay.
then the other 2 would be for masters.
Okay. So
And so
all your program people, your faculty that work with you were all at the same level and they knew enough to get this started, because that's kind of where I'm at. I'm undergrad, but my master's level people are not with me yet.
that is a great question. I think you heard my timeline, like when I was enraged and wanted to change to when I applied. And so there was a lot that I had to do knowledge-wise in between. And I would say for those that were working with me, I would say I had the highest level of knowledge, which is strange for me to say because, like I said, I'm always learning. But I would say I would probably was considered the lead developer, and then we kind of were just working together at the same time. So like they weren't doing a course, they weren't developing a course while I was. Like we were developing together at the same time. So one course at a time to ensure that there was alignment. Um, and so once it was, once we were accredited in July 2023, and we had to make sure everyone was had passed the KPIRI, was a time people really had to hit it into high gear to make sure that they were prepared. And I would say for a lot of it, I wasn't necessarily co-teaching, but I was in the different courses. I was checking on feedback, I was checking on grading, I was checking to make sure that everything kind of was making sense according to the KPS. So it took a lot of development, took a lot of support, but I feel a lot more comfortable and confident that our instructors at this point, I don't have to dip into courses as much as I used to, if at all.
Okay,
And did
thanks.
that answer your question?
Yes, I just, I mean, I'm kind of the lone person, so I was just wondering, because it sounded like you were at one time, but you did have people, I mean, we're not there at our university, we're not there with our master's level. I mean, I think we could be, but it's just, we're not there yet. So maybe you don't have to do the master's along with the undergrad. You can just do the undergrad, right? So maybe that would be
Yes.
the driving force if that happened. Maybe that would happen. Yeah,
That is a really good idea. I like how you say, like you're saying not yet, and you're also
yeah.
saying like a little bit at a time, like one small piece. If you started with undergrad, just imagine how many first year teachers are going to step in ready to teach. So I think that's great.
Yeah, but we
And,
need also our stuff in Arkansas as well, so, yeah.
and can I ask, how did you like develop yourself, Leslie? Like,
Well,
what did you do?
well, I was on the webinar with you last summer or this summer, whenever it was, but I
Mhm.
came to university and everything was balanced literacy, and then they sort of gave me the class that wasn't. So that met the science of reading because it's mandated in our state. So I just began because I taught balanced literacy for 20 years, and so I just began developing myself and doing those things that you did, and like going to the reading league in 22, and just it's just a long process. And so here I am 2 years later. I went to the reading league conference this last week, and my knowledge base is exponential compared to what it was 2 years ago. So I feel like that I have a lot more, to go with and to do that. I want our university to be IDA accredited, but maybe it's just with undergrad at first, right? So I'm still developing the coursework, and we'll see where it goes. But that's my goal.
Excellent. Feel free to reach out. But like you were saying, like starting with undergrad is great. And then you'll know the ins and outs of accreditation. So when you go to do masters, you'll be that much more prepared. So thank you for sharing. I know I put you on the spot. I apologize. Um, I saw in the chat, how many, if any of the courses are online? Great question. So the reading endorsement program is all online. And then we have pre-recorded lectures, and we have all the resources. One thing we offer is we have online office hours once a week. And the reason that one has to be online is because since it's reading endorsement, it's across the state. So I work with people in Yakima, Wenatchee, Seattle, on the coast. And I think it's helpful because it's more widely available. That one's online. The master's programs are required like attendance, whether in person or online. We have a couple different options. There's one option where you can meet in person, and then there's one option where they're basically online asynchronous meetings, and synchronous like opportunities as well. So great question. Is the Cape Perry passing an IDA requirement or yours as in CityU? So Anna asked that question. The Cape Perry is an IDA requirement. So in order for any of our instructors, sorry, in order for any of our instructors to teach, they all had to pass the Cape Perry. And so if they did not, or they don't have a passing score, they can't teach the courses. Great question. And then Jessica asked, what are the costs? I don't remember exactly, and my guess is based on inflation, I guess. It's not as the same amount, but I know that the fast track is a lot cheaper. So let's say the fast track is $1,000 and the pipeline is like $6,000. That is not the exact amount, but that kind of shows the difference because the fast track, you're supposed to just, everything's ready. I use the CAPT. I feel confident. I just want you to just tell me if it's accredited or not versus the pipeline would, and it's more expensive because you have all the meetings, you have the feedback option. I believe the step one of reaching out to the IDA, that one of the first things they send back to you is these are the costs. Here's the pipeline. Here's the fast track for accreditation. So I apologize, I don't have that exact amount.
Did you have any, it doesn't sound like it, but did you have any pushback with your colleagues about going this route and having to take the K Perry, or were they all in?
That's a great question. I didn't mention that. I was talking all about myself and how I wanted this. But my dean was 100% on board. My provost was 100% on board. They asked for me to do a pitch, and to do like a slide presentation. And it was less knowledge and more feeling and passion. Since then, I've learned a lot more and I had a lot more evidence base. But they were on board. And one of the people in our ed leadership side, his son is dyslexic. And so he was like, oh yeah, I wish my son had teachers that went through this. So yes. So everyone that were in charge of the financial side were 100% on board. And then the faculty I work with, they were also on board. Two of them had already done letters or something. One is a reading interventionist. So I just so happened to be lucky enough to have two of them already on board and already believed in the science of reading. And then our fourth faculty member has kind of developed along with me as well. And we've done professional development, we've done faculty development, we've done book studies. So there are ways to support. And I really am hoping to add another faculty member or two, but it's just not as easy as it could be because of the barriers. There's so many higher ed people that, we didn't learn this when we were in teacher prep or in the classroom. And so I think if anyone is aware of, but I've heard there's whispers of there being like professional development for professors, and that there is things that are being developed or provided for. And in Dr. Moat's Teaching Reading is Rocket Science, she says that there should be like academies for professors. They need professional development too. And that's kind of what I was doing my best with at City U. But just imagine if we just all signed up for, Bethany Moffitt's Professional Development Academy for Professors. I don't have one, and then we just know that that too is accredited, and we know that that is great. And, Mount St. Joseph is a really good example, the doctoral program. That's where I'm learning and developing myself personally as well. And then I got another question about the fees for accreditation. If it's annual or one-time fee. The accreditation fee was one time, and I believe it is for 5 years, and then 10 years. And I believe the 5-year mark is you have to basically do like a check-in, and they have to look at my impact metrics at City U. I think part 5, I didn't really talk much about it. We chose the K Peary. So we have to have a certain number of teacher candidates or insert candidates. They must pass the K Peary. So let's say it's like 95%. If our program does not prepare teachers, at least 95% of them to pass the K Peary, then we would lose accreditation, which I think is important. We have to be held accountable. And if we are not making sure our students pass, then we shouldn't be accredited anymore. So to go back to your original question, it's just basically 10 years, one fee, and then the 5-year check. And then they also checked in to make sure everyone of our faculty passed the K Peary. So that was also a check-in. So they're not just letting us run wild. There is still accountability, which I think is important. Like I said, I keep talking, where's the accountability? The accreditation from IDA does the accountability.
I just have one more question. When you were revising your courses and the syllabi, how did you like think about like how much of each like content area does this level of course need to have? Like somewhat of that balance. Like this is undergrad, so does that look different than your master's program in terms of like depth of knowledge?
Yes, that is a really good consideration, especially as we're thinking about undergrad, and thinking about reading endorsements and even just like capacity. Like this is their first time going through. They likely have no experience in the classroom. And it's also almost like a blank slate, which is nice, because this is like the first thing they're learning is the science of reading. So the depth of knowledge, there was a consideration. And we started, because I said I had to revise a bunch of the gen ed courses. We actually started with that and then kind of expanded to think, okay, well, how much deeper can we get? What more do they need to read? What more do they need to know if they're in the master's level? If they've already been teachers for 10, 20 years and they have kind of a framework to build upon. So I recommend starting with least complex to most complex. And I think that the framework that I used is I basically just thought about like the 5 components of reading and Scarborough's rope and the pieces, and I just made sure that each course had all of those things and then the KPS. So I think a good way to think about it, and that's how we developed like our 5 courses, was essentially around the 5 components of reading in a way. Okay, well, if there are no more questions, like I said, my email is in the chat. I am happy, as a person that felt alone for a long time, I would be very happy to support, talk, chat, commiserate, encourage, because this is hard. It's hard work. I 6 or 7 months, didn't do a lot of sleeping or anything else. But that hard work paid off. And like I said, when I think about Dr. Murray and I think about when she asked me that one student you let down, I just think like, never again. That's my hope. Not my teacher candidates, not their students. Kids should not be let down. And so that's why the hard work is worth it. And that's why we should encourage and support and provide resources to each other as a community, which is where we are here. So thank you for your time, Megan.
Yes, thank you so much. This was great. I loved it. So I will share out, if you want to share the PowerPoint, I can include that when I share out the recording. And then thank you again for your time for joining us. Next month, we will have a talk about the interdisciplinary work that's happening over at Purdue University. So hopefully you will join us for that one. So thank you again for your time. And then I will send out the PowerPoint and the recording by the end of the week.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
everyone.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.